Today, we're unpacking the geopolitics of a single product, one that starts as a humble leaf in the Andes, was once, believe it or not, endorsed by a pope, and now fuels a global black market worth hundreds of billions of dollars. So let's start with its history, because here's a surprising fact. Before cocaine became this global menace, it was actually a mainstream celebrated medicine. And its journey from one to the other is, well, way more complex than you might think.
You know, one of cocaine's earliest and most influential cheerleaders was Sigmund Freud. Yeah, that Freud. In 1884, he published a paper called Über Coca, and in it, he praised it as a wonder drug that had, and I'm quoting here, no addictive effects. Now, he would later have to completely reverse his position after a close friend died from an overdose, but by then, the cat was out of the bag. His endorsement had helped launch cocaine straight into the mainstream.
And this timeline just shows you how fast it all happened. I mean, think about it. In just over 50 years, cocaine went from a scientific discovery in a German lab to a praised therapeutic to being the secret ingredient in the original Coca-Cola, and then, finally, to a controlled substance with the 1912 Opium Convention. That treaty right there, it really set the stage for the massive illegal market that we see today.
And it really wasn't just Freud. Cocaine was everywhere. The most famous product was probably this French wine tonic called Vin Mariani. It was so popular, it was even endorsed by Pope Leo XIII. Can you imagine? By the turn of the century, you could find more than 60 different drinks sold across the US that openly listed cocaine right on the label.
Okay, so let's jump from the past to the modern day. How does this all start? Well, it starts at the source. You know, geopolitics always begins with geography. And for cocaine, that geography is a very specific band of the Andes Mountains. The unique climate, the high altitude, it all creates the absolute perfect conditions for growing coca leaves. This isn't just a major production zone, it's the undisputed global epicenter for cultivation. The journey from a simple leaf to a powder that gets shipped worldwide really has these three key steps. First, the leaves are harvested. Then, often right there near the farms, they're mashed up, sometimes with gasoline of all things, into a crude coca paste. Finally, that paste gets taken to these hidden, rustic labs where it's crystallized into the powder that will eventually enter the global supply chain.
And what's really striking here is the sheer dominance of just three countries, Colombia, Peru, and Bolivia. I mean, together they account for pretty much all of the world's coca cultivation. Colombia alone makes up 2/3 of the entire pie. And now, look at their massive neighbor, right next door, Brazil. That shared border, that's a geopolitical fact with enormous implications for traffic.
And the scale we're talking about is just staggering. It's kind of counterintuitive, right? You'd think with all the eradication efforts, production would go down. And while the total land used for growing has actually decreased, production has absolutely skyrocketed. Traffickers have just gotten way more efficient, using better plants and processing techniques to churn out this immense volume, over 1,700 tons a year. Okay, Section 3. Global superhighways. So how on earth does 1,700 tons of product get from some remote farm in the Andes to a city street on the other side of the world? It moves through a network of global trafficking superhighways.
This isn't just one route, it's a whole global logistics network. You've got this web of transit nations that act as the backbone of the supply chain. Mexico is the main gateway to the US, but Brazil has become the key launchpad for shipments headed to Europe, Africa, and Asia. And we're seeing West African nations like Benin and Nigeria becoming more and more important as transshipment hubs. Let's just focus on Brazil for a second, because its location is everything. It shares thousands of kilometers of vast, porous, and nearly impossible to patrol borders with all three producer nations. It's a natural superhighway for trafficking. But here's the twist. That proximity and the lower prices it brings have also turned Brazil itself into the world's second-largest consumer market.
So, inside Brazil, the cocaine flows along two main arteries. You've got the Solomones route, which uses the huge Amazon River system to bring product in from the north. But the real superhighway is the Rota Caipira, which literally translates to the Hick route. Here, small planes fly low from Bolivia and Peru and land on hundreds of these secret dirt airstrips. From there, the drugs are moved to the port of Santos to be shipped out to the rest of the world.
Okay, Section 4, the world's biggest markets. We follow the production, we follow the trafficking, now let's follow the money to where this whole journey ends, the consumer hubs that fuel the entire operation.
You know, for decades, this was largely seen as an American problem. And yeah, the US is still the largest single market, but look at how much that has changed. Europe and Brazil now have nearly the same number of users.
The demand isn't just in one place anymore. It's truly global. So, why does this trade keep going, despite a decades-long war on drugs? Well, the answer is pretty simple. It's economics. The entire engine is driven by one single thing, an absolutely immense profit from value multiplication. Let's just look at the numbers.
Right at the source, in the mountains of Colombia, 1 kilogram of cocaine costs about $1,375. It's cheap because supply is everywhere, and it hasn't racked up any costs for transportation or risk, yet.
Now, let's follow that same kilogram all the way to the end of the line. After it's been smuggled across oceans, passed between different criminal networks, and diluted for street sale, its value just skyrockets. In a place like Australia, that same kilo can sell for over $210,000. That is a markup of over 15,000%. When you have that kind of profit margin, risk starts to look a whole lot less risky.
So, this immense profit incentive, it leads us straight to the central strategic dilemma in the whole fight against cocaine.
For decades now, the so-called war on drugs has really been fought with two different playbooks. You have supply-side strategies, which is what we usually think of. Police raids, burning coca fields, seizing shipments. They focus on stopping the product. And then you have demand-side strategies, which focus on stopping the user through things like prevention, education, and treatment programs.
Which brings us to our final big question. As long as you have this immense demand for the drug in wealthy nations, and at the same time you have profound economic desperation and the places where coca is grown, the market will always find a way. You might squeeze the trade in one place, sure. You might change the routes or the players or the methods, but as long as that fundamental imbalance between supply and demand exists, can the flow ever really be stopped? Well, that's the $100 billion question.